Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode, we have week 2 of our NFL free agency frenzy-esque breakdown. So there is not really much other to say about it. We already talked about how crazy it was last week. Not near as crazy this week, but still some pretty cool signings.
A lot of moves that were still done. Still a lot to be done also.
Definitely. So we're going to jump right into it, starting with the releases again. We had 2 running back releases this week. First of all, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers let go of Leonard Fournette, and the Cowboys released Ezekiel Elliott, which the Leonard Fournette one kind of makes sense other than the fact that they don't really have another running back there right now. Last offseason, they let Ronald Jones, who was a promising up-and-coming running back, go. They haven't really drafted anybody recently, and now they let go of Leonard Fournette. So I don't know who's going to be the running back there in Tampa, but a shocking one to me is that the Cowboys actually released Zeke. I know they talked about it a lot, but there was a couple of years there, not near as much anymore, but especially about 2-3 years ago, where Ezekiel Elliott was the face of that franchise. He was pretty much that entire offense. He was most of the Dallas fans' favorite player. So it's so weird what just a few years to do. And at only 27 years old, Zeke is now sitting on the free agency market.
Yeah, it just goes to show how quickly running backs last in the NFL. At 27 years old, and he's already being written off as past his prime. That's just crazy to think. That just goes to show how much he got used, not only at Ohio State, but in Dallas as well.
Yeah. Something I didn't think about until right now when I started talking about Leonard Fournette, Tampa Bay may be a likely landing spot for Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad.
They're going to be looking for a running back, get a young guy, give him a probably smaller than you would usually think, give him a little bit more of a prove it contract rather. We could see Ezekiel Elliott in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers jersey here soon. Next up, we're going to jump on to the re-signs and start with 2 different re-signs, with the Giants re-signing wide receiver Darius Slayton, as well as the Bills re-signing all-pro safety Jordan Poyer. Both really good re-signs for these teams, in my opinion. Both positions that neither of these teams would have been good at all, even with these re-signs, aren't the biggest strengths on their team. So without these players, they would have been really struggling in those positions. Giants at receiver and Bills at safety, respectively. So good re-signs.
Yeah, that's a nice re-sign for the Bills, really. That brings back the tandem of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, which was a solid starting safety duo. And the Giants get one of their star wide receivers back, which I'm surprised didn't get more money elsewhere with the light free wide receiver free agency market, but he decides to go back to New York and see if he can continue his magic with Daniel Jones.
Something might be happening there in New York with a evolving Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll there at head coach. So. And then now the big re-sign for this week was the Eagles re-signing Darius Slay, their all-pro corner, on a 2-year, $402 million contract, with $32 million of that being fully guaranteed. And a great re-sign for them after losing CJ Gardner-Johnson, who we'll get to in a little bit here, just a little bit of a teaser. But they did already re-sign James Bradberry on a 2-year deal recently, and they were having talks with CJ GJ, but they couldn't make a deal with him, and then were able to re-sign Slay and keep that great cornerback tandem together.
Yeah, and they were able to add to that tandem by adding Greedy Williams and making it a trio now. So that'll be really fun to see how that defensive backfield looks in Philadelphia. And it's because of CJ Gardner-Johnson leaving and turning down the Eagles' offer that Darius Slay is able to stay in Philadelphia.
Yep, certainly. So now we will jump on to some of those signings and new faces on new teams, starting with the Minnesota Vikings, because why not start with the Minnesota Vikings? We picked up 2 separate defensive players.
Packers sure aren't signing anyone. So.
No, at all. The Packers are pretending they're not even a team right now. They're just letting people go. No re-signs, no signings. They're just going to have a 30-man roster by the time the year starts.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the way it's going.
Packers entering rebuild? Question mark. I don't
man.
know. Who knows? But starting with the Minnesota Vikings, we pick up two different defensive players, both on 2-year contracts, starting off with former Cardinal Byron Murphy Jr. on a 2-year, $17 million deal, and then moving on to former Packer defensive lineman Dean Lowry on a 2-year, $8 million deal. So two big parts of a Brian Flores defense is a pass rush, 3-front offensive line, and man-to-man corners, which is something we get here. Dean Lowry isn't quite a pass rush specialist per se, but as a true three-front defensive end, he generates enough pass rush to make him worth that signing. And getting him at only $8 million throughout 2 years is a pretty good deal in my opinion. And then we do spend a little more money on Byron Murphy Jr., the former Cardinal corner. But I really like Byron Murphy Jr. He's an extremely athletic guy, pretty damn good in man coverage, and he's willing to get in there and make plays in the run game, which will fit in perfectly with that new defense there with Brian Flores.
Yeah, this is definitely a system signing because you guys needed a man-to-man corner, and you got one at least now. For now until the draft, but you really needed somebody to start building around in that defensive backfield. And then Dean Lowry is a system 3-4 guy. He's not great at pass rushing, but he holds his own. His real weakness is run stopping. So good luck with that.
Hey, our run defense was already awful last year, and we went 12-4 or whatever it was. So we'll be fine. Who needs run defense? It's overrated. But I do think Callan kind of hinted at the Vikings taking a corner in the draft, and I do still think that the Vikings take corner with that 23rd overall pick, or maybe even move up and get one of the more top-level corners in this year's draft. But nevertheless, really like the Byron Murphy signing. Now we're going to jump on to a couple of quarterbacks here, starting with the Washington Commanders signing Jacoby Brissett from the Cleveland Browns, and also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting Baker Mayfield on a single-year $8.5 million deal.
Yeah, this is, I think it's a questionable signing for the Commanders. I don't understand what they're doing at quarterback. They want to go with Sam Howell. They let Tyler Heineke go, and they bring in Jacoby Brissett. Unless they just want to run the QB sneak a lot, which Brissett's really good at. So they could do that. But it seems like I thought they were going with Sam Howell, and I guess Brissett just wants to be a backup somewhere. I really think he has starting potential, but he keeps signing in places where he's sticking as a backup. And unlike that situation in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, he's going there to start and be the starter and possibly rebuild his career. He kind of revived it a little bit in Los Angeles with the Rams there at the end of the season. And he was able to pay off for him, and he got a nice little free agency deal in the Buccaneers, who are moving on from Tom Brady.
Yep. I agree with Callan that the Jacoby Brissett signing doesn't make any sense for Jacoby Brissett, but I think it's a really solid pickup for the Commanders, actually. You got a young, in my opinion, very promising guy in Sam Howell, who was a rookie last year entering his sophomore season here. Didn't get much play time last year, but I thought he looked good in a little bit he did get. And now you give him a guy like Jacoby Brissett, who is going to help him out, kind of learn the ropes of the QB, a veteran guy that's been doing it for a while, and also a really solid backup in case Howell doesn't work out or maybe Howell gets injured. And you mentioned the QB sneak, and you get a fun new toy at quarterback there. You don't want him getting beat up in the trenches in a QB sneak. You throw in a guy like Jacoby Brissett who's going to get you those couple of yards no matter what. So I love the pickup for the Commanders. And the pickup for the Bucs in Baker Mayfield just makes sense. As Callan said, lost Tom Brady. They don't really have anybody right now except for maybe Kyle Trask. So you get a guy like Baker Mayfield who's going to work his ass off for you.
Another prove-it one-year deal for him. So he'll have to prove it again. But if he continues to play like he did at the end of the year, they'll be in solid shape.
Certainly, yes. Now, moving on, the Bengals win the Orlando Brown lottery, and Cincinnati signs Orlando Brown Jr. to a 4-year, $64 million deal to anchor down that left tackle there. Or no, they have
Jonah Williams.
Jonah Williams.
However, Jonah Williams requested a trade after the signing. So I believe they're going to play Orlando Brown at left tackle and move on from Jonah Williams.
That's an interesting move. Jonah Williams was a really promising prospect, I think, and was developing really well there in Cincinnati. So I'm surprised that they go with someone like Orlando Brown Jr., especially when you could move him to right tackle and just have really good bookend tackles. But they give him a lot of money, so they're definitely going to play him somewhere, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And they're going to expect a lot out of him. And I think he'll step up for the most part. I don't think he's going to go anywhere and just be the best tackle in the league by any means, but I think he's a really solid guy, especially in the run game. So Joe Mixon should be happy with this pickup.
Yeah, and the Bengals continue to rebuild that offensive line after the Super Bowl debacle. And this is really a big piece to build around that offensive line when you get a cornerstone left tackle.
Yep. Lions get better. The Detroit Lions get better on both sides of the ball this week by signing both David Montgomery, running back, on a 3-year, $18 million deal, and also signing the aforementioned safety CJ Gardner-Johnson on a 1-year, $8 million deal. If you ask me, that is an absolute steal to get CJ Gardner-Johnson on. And the David Montgomery pickup is a little questionable, especially when it comes to the money. But it is, any flaws of the David Montgomery deal got overshadowed by the absolute finesse that they got getting CJ Gardner-Johnson on a prove-it deal. That secondary is young, but I think showed a lot of promise. And they're adding another guy who's young, but has proved himself a lot more. And they somehow get him on a more of a prove-it deal. But I don't know what more he has to prove, really. He's stayed healthy all of his years in the league. He's went to multiple teams and played really well on all of them. Great pickup for the Lions as they just continue to improve. And we're not even to the draft yet where they have multiple first-round picks. So.
Yeah, the Lions are going to be scary to come up here. And that's really good for that defensive backfield. That's a solid pickup for them. They needed someone in that safety spot to be the leader back there in the defensive backfield, and they got one in CJ Gardner-Johnson.
Yep, and since the Lions have a new running back, former Lion Jamal Williams is heading down south and signs a 3-year deal with the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that Detroit let him go because he was one of the top leaders in rushing touchdowns this season. And so for them to let him go and go to the Saints is very surprising, considering they just replaced him with David Montgomery. But as far as it goes for the Saints, I think it's a great pickup, a solid backup for Alvin Kamara, a guy who can get in there and really pound it into the end zone, whereas Kamara is more of that finesse kind of guy, shifty kind of runner. He's not really the power guy. And so I think it's a solid compliment to Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, just looking at the numbers and kind of the situation, my assumption or my view on it is that someone in Detroit really liked David Montgomery, hence why they were willing to drop a little bit of money on him and sign him on a long-term contract. And then they looked at their depth chart and they had David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, and Jamal Williams, and just kind of realized that Jamal Williams wasn't unnecessary anymore. But as Callan mentioned, he is going to be a great tandem there with Alvin Kamara, and he's going to be very similar to that Mark Ingram role that the Saints have had these past few years, which is put him in on the goal line and let him score what Jamal Williams is best at. Really good play for both teams, in my opinion. I think that the Lions get a really good new running back in David Montgomery, and the Saints get an amazing system guy in Jamal Williams. So, another really good pickup, in my opinion, tight end Mike Gesicki signs with the Patriots on a 1-year deal worth $9 million. Mike Gesicki was one of my favorite free agents coming into this. The tight end position is just so versatile in the NFL these days, especially when you get athletic tight ends like Mike Gesicki, who are just as good route runners and almost as quick as wide receivers and bigger than most linebackers, if not just as big. So really versatile and a really good tight end for this Patriots offense. Wherever they're going, whoever knows where the Patriots offense is going to be the next season. They seem to be changing constantly, but nevertheless, a new weapon.
Yeah, it's a nice pickup, I think, for New England, who's going to run that 2 tight end set. You know, they also picked up Juju Smith-Schuster, which is also a nice pickup for them after losing Jacoby Myers. And they're going to run that 2 tight end set with and then try to run the ball, I think. I don't know. That's what I think, at least. That's the way they're building it with Hunter Henry and now Mike Gesicki. They got more tight end options and receiving options. So we'll see where they go with it. But they're leaning towards that 2 tight ends kind of offense.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have so many non-traditional blocking, athletic receiving tight ends on a team that's mostly run-based. But we'll talk about another release or another lost Patriot later that makes their offense even more confusing on where it's going next year. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Next up, we got the Panthers picking up former Viking Adam Thielen on a 3-year, $25 million deal. I think that's a little expensive for Thielen. I really do. But it's going to be a great place for Thielen. It's going to be somewhere where he's happy. It's going to be tough not having in Minnesota, but he's going somewhere warmer. He's going somewhere where he's going to be a main receiver. He's going to get a lot of targets. And assumably, the Panthers are going to go quarterback in this year's draft. And Adam Thielen's going to be a new quarterback's best friend. Always open, sure-handed, no matter where you put it on him. I think that this is a pretty solid deal overall for both the Panthers and Thielen.
Yeah, Thielen wanted to get his money, and he got his money by getting that deal from the Panthers. I know Minnesota wasn't going to pay him that much, when they got Justin Jefferson coming up on their deal. But as far as the Panthers go, it's a really good pickup for them, who needed a number one receiver after trading DJ Moore. And they're still been linked to DJ Shark, so they could also add more weapons. But I think that Thielen automatically becomes their new number one and will help lead that new offense under the new quarterback.
Yep. And then moving even a little more south, down to Houston, the Texans signed 2 offensive weapons this past week, and the likes of former Cowboy Dalton Schultz on a 1-year, $9 million deal, as well as former Buffalo Bill Devin Singletary on a 1-year deal worth just short of $4 million in full. Amazing pickups on both of these. Not even necessarily the player, though those are both very good players for them to get, but the contracts especially.
Very good.
I know they're only 1-year deals, but both of these they are saving so much money on. They are getting true budget beasts in this opinion in this situation, because Devin Singletary is mostly goal filled. His isn't even fully guaranteed, so he might not even be worth a full entire $4 million. And you look at Dalton Schultz, he was getting contracts that were more like 3-year into the 30 millions, and now he has to settle down for a 1-year, $9 million prove it deal. So overall, the Texans making some big pickups on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, the Texans have done really well in this free agency year. The pickups of both Singletary and Dalton Schultz, I think, are solid pickups, especially in that tight end room where they needed a leading tight end to go the team with Jordan Akins, especially when they're going to have more than likely have a new quarterback. Maybe they'll run Davis Mills, but they'll more than likely have a new quarterback, and they're going to need a solid tight end and a solid receiving running back to team with that new quarterback.
Yep, and they also still have Dameon Pierce, who had a stellar rookie season last year. So I am a Davis Mills fan to the core, but there's no way they run him again. I think he'll be an amazing backup, but that 3rd overall pick, they got to be going one of the top 4 quarterbacks in this year's draft. The Bills replaced aforementioned running back Devin Singletary with a new running back of their own with the signing of former New England Patriot Damian Harris on a 1-year deal. This is a good pickup for them. I looked it up and I couldn't find any money yet, so I don't know if they haven't made the contract official. So we'll have to see where the money falls and how much they end up paying for him. But they lose Devin Singletary, who's a true receiving back, and they get this more true running back in Damian Harris, who's not going to be as great out of the backfield, but he's going to be a lot better in between the tackles than Devin Singletary ever was. And you match him up with last year's rookie, James Cook, out of Georgia rather, and it makes a really good running back duo right there. You got James Cook to be more of your 3rd down back receiving guy, and you got Damon Harris getting you an average of 3-4 yards on those inside the tackle runs on your 1st and 2nd down. It just makes that Bills offense that is always scary, pretty much regardless of who's on it, even scarier. I feel like we say this every year, but they keep making really good signings, so it's hard to not say it every year.
Yeah, Damian Harris is one of those pounded between the tackles kind of guys, and the Bills haven't really had that running back the last 2 years. So this will be a new dimension for the Bills offense, and it'll be really nice and complement Josh Allen very well.
So those are some of the major signings, and we got one big trade from this past week. The Texans, who we just talked about making two pretty good signings a little bit ago, also made that trade, sending wide receiver Brandon Cooks to the Dallas Cowboys, and in return only get a 2024 5th and 6th round. So no short-term payoffs. They're both going to be long-term payoffs. Not very big payoffs at that, and they give up a guy like Brandon Cooks, who was that wide receiver one in their offense. Probably won't be the wide receiver one in Dallas, but pretty damn close to it, and a good wide receiver two to match there with CeeDee Lamb. But the Texans, interesting there to get rid of a good veteran target like that when you're likely about to pick up a new quarterback. So I'm guessing that they're probably going to go receiver in this draft as well and just go all young and see if those rookies can build a good connection. But interesting move by the Texans.
They still have Robert Woods.
I forgot about Robert Woods.
Don't forget they have Robert Woods now leading that receiving corps. So that did make Brandon Cooks a little bit expendable, I believe. And the Dallas Cowboys get one solid receiver. Cooks is only 29, and he's been traded now, I think, 4 or 5 times. And it's just been crazy that he's just this kind of guy, this kind of player that just gets traded multiple times throughout his career because he's put up solid numbers everywhere he's went. He's been the number one receiver in Texas and Houston for the Texans. He's been a number one in LA. He's been a number one.
He started in New Orleans.
Yeah. He's been a number one in New England. So it's just weird that this guy gets traded all the time. But I think that he'll go here in Dallas and complement Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb very well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I totally blanked the Robert Woods signing. It does make a lot more sense now that I factor that in, especially considering they also still have former Michigan receiver Nico Collins, who I believe was a 2021 guy, but I've really liked him ever since he came out of Michigan. So that was all of the big stuff for this week. Sorry to have kind of another cut and dry episode with the free agency frenzy like this. But stay tuned because next week, it's an exciting week. We are going to have our mock draft 1.0. Free agency is finally over. A lot of the dust has settled, and I'm sure a few of the bigger guys who are still left on the market will be signed by the time we record next week.
There's still one trade that we're waiting on that's supposed to happen.
Oh, yeah. I guess we got to make one trade official, but
hasn't happened yet. And if it doesn't happen, who knows what happens if it doesn't happen. That's going to be even more interesting.
The Rodgers situation is so funny because it is the most official, unofficial thing that I've seen in the NFL in a long time. People are like calling him a Jet. I think he's literally in New York already. But there's been no official trade or release or signing. It's a very
Packers still own his contract. So.
It's a very, very strange situation, but I'm sure we will have more of an update on that next week before we get into our mock drafts.
I've been reading that the deadline for the trade to happen is the NFL draft. So if it doesn't happen at the NFL draft, things could get very weird in Green Bay.
Oh man, wouldn't that be? You could cut the tension in the air all around Green Bay with a knife, not even in the Packers organization, anywhere in Wisconsin pretty much.
I mean, they'd have to start him, right?
Who knows what they would do at that point.
It'll be interesting to see.
I was going to say, I almost want to see that now, just because what would happen? It would be so fascinating to see. But make sure to stay tuned in next week for Cal and I's Mock Draft 1.0. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.